That's fine. Great intro. Love that.
Welcome to episode 3. Whips, chains, brains.
Yeah, it's been a bit delayed, this one.
Yeah.
Was having a low-key meltdown for like a week, so...
It happens, girlfriend.
It does.
It'd be like that
I'm
sometimes.
just gonna sit here and be gentle with myself.
Exactly. You are listening to Lauren.
Oh, yeah, and Tarryn.
Yeah, we have to introduce ourselves.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thanks.
It wasn't welcoming you. The start of every podcast, we just sound like manic people, but
Because we are.
Yeah.
It's either mania or depression.
take your pick.
Yeah. Which is why this one was delayed, because otherwise the first few days, this would have
Yeah.
been such a fucking mundane episode.
Mm-hmm.
Today we are going to discuss voyeurism.
Rub those hands together.
Yeah, so this is a paraphilia that I have written a paper on. So I've done quite a fair amount of research into it. I have a personal interest in it.
I wonder why.
So
Be interesting.
Yeah, be interesting. Which may become more obvious throughout or may not. You know, I'll just let you make
Yes.
those assumptions for yourself.
You just take what you will from this.
Take this information as you please.
Yes, do what you would like with it.
But it is a paraphilia. We were talking about discussing paraphilias. This one is the one that I've got the most knowledge on up to this point.
Yeah.
And I don't really think... I would say the behaviour is quite well known, but perhaps not like the disorder name itself.
Yeah, so give us like an overview.
Right. So voyeurism and voyeuristic disorder are different, obviously.
Okay.
Well, I suppose maybe not obviously.
Yeah. Okay.
Obviously.
Am I better than everybody else?
Do you think people think I'm perfect?
Everyone's like, no, shut the fuck up and tell us what voyeurism is.
Oh my god. Okay, so I'm like, please watch Hot Chick. I don't think I'm perfect.
That's an inside joke.
Yeah, inside joke. They're always inside jokes. Okay, so voyeurism, the behavior itself is like when you kind of feel turned on by watching somebody else like have sex or undress or just like naked or partaking in sexual activity. Voyeuristic disorder differs because it has to be associated with like distress or impairment or like pain or suffering to the person or the victim. So that's kind of, I would say, what like most differentiates it.
Yeah.
But also there's kind of in the disorder like this intensity or like really persistent like compulsive thoughts.
Compulsive, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, so that's kind of what makes it distressing for the person, unless of course it's
For the person that has the disorder.
yeah,
Okay.
unless of course it's like comorbid with, say, a personality disorder where they don't really feel distressed by their behavior because they're like narcissistic
I was
or
about to feel like a narcissist.
yeah, or like antisocial personality disorder or something like that, where they kind of maybe lack a bit more empathy or they don't really feel too distressed from their behavioral thoughts, but then they still act on them and cause distress to the victim, and then that's still classed as a disorder because somebody is being harmed in this process.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, that's like a whole other episode in itself, narcissistic disorder as well.
Oh yeah, but like paraphilic disorders are, I would
Often tied.
They're always comorbid with something else. Like
Yeah.
often even comorbid with other, because comorbid just means with another disorder or another illness.
Yeah.
So often are also comorbid with other paraphilias. Like, so one paraphilic disorder, usually that individual will have multiple paraphilic tendencies of other kinds.
Okay.
But often too will have some kind of association with like depression or anxiety or OCD, like obsessive compulsive disorder,
Right.
or a personality disorder. I would say personality disorders are most common in the forensic setting when you see paraphilic disorders come through.
Okay.
So like if you were to see like a pedophile come through, there are usually comorbid personality disorders, or if somebody was in a forensic setting for voyeuristic disorder, it would usually be associated with a personality disorder too.
Okay.
Because the common human would feel distressed by this kind of thoughts and behavior.
Definitely.
And so won't necessarily act on it, which means that they don't end up in the forensic setting. They don't end up going through the legal system.
For sure. Because I often have thought, well, like, I have fantasies about maybe like someone walking past the window while me and G Daddy are having sex.
Well, that's exhibitionism. So,
and that's the other side of the coin.
I wouldn't even say that's exhibitionism. It's just exhibitionistic behavior. So, or maybe like thoughts.
Okay.
Because exhibitionism, like traditionally speaking, would be someone like going into a park and just like flashing them their fucking have their dick hanging out and then be like turned on by it.
I would never do that, obviously.
No.
But I have definitely had sex in a park before.
Yeah, and see, like, what part of that is like a turn on?
It's so exciting. Like maybe I'll get caught.
Do you think it's the maybe you get caught? Or exactly, do you actually, like, if you knew someone was like behind a tree watching you, would that like turn you on?
Not if I knew that they were watching me and like really enjoying it.
Right.
It's more like...
You want them to be disturbed by
it. Absolutely not. Like, I think it's more just like I want them to like maybe, so say like for like the window, for example, like if me and Gita are having sex in the window or whatever.
Yeah.
And someone walks past, like I don't want them to like stop and like start jerking off or anything. But like I like if they were just like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Like I'd be a bit like, yeah, watch him pound me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess.
But I don't have...
No.
It's not a disorder.
No.
Okay.
So a disorder is only a disorder when it is impairing like your life or causing distress. Like if you were having intense fantasies to the point where you started like just displaying yourself naked in the window and you're supposed to be like working and there's like a child next door like panicking and you just can't help yourself. That is a disorder.
Okay, guys, I don't do that. I'm really worried that this is going to start something.
Yeah, so do you see the difference?
I definitely see the difference. Because I don't need that. Guys, don't watch me do things.
No.
I'm kidding.
No, but like it's so normal to have like some kind of, even voyeurism, like the behavior is quite normal in like teenage years as well, like the behavior itself rather than the
well, because you're curious.
Yeah, so the behavior like in teenage years, it's like really normal when you're under the age of 18 to be like quite curious.
Yeah.
And so you can't even diagnose voyeuristic disorder under the age of 18 for that reason. Like teenagers kind of play in this behavior anyway. I remember when we were teenagers and we would be like at a party. I remember my friend and her partner literally were in a room like having sex and everyone was like, oh my god guys, it'd be so funny, let's go fucking go around by the window and like watch them. Like do you know what I mean? Yeah. And there's like 10 teenagers.
Well, it's how you learn, right? Like
yeah, I just think it's really,
well, not learn,
the curiosity is normal in those teenage years.
Yeah.
And even like there was a study done on university students saying like if you knew that you wouldn't get caught and you could watch somebody undressing in like through a window, like say you were like walking past and someone was like nude undressing or partaking in sexual activity, would you watch if you knew that you wouldn't get caught? And the percentage was like 80% or something of people that said if they knew they wouldn't get caught, they would partake. It was
my God,
more common in men than the women.
Oh, okay.
But they would observe it.
Yeah.
But then when they were said, okay, well, what about the chances of being caught? It dropped significantly.
Interesting.
Because I think it's just like a curiosity thing. Like it's like, but when it becomes something where I suppose maybe you could be shamed about it, it's all of a sudden like, oh no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah. So why do these people with this disorder take that risk?
Well, I want to briefly cover on like exhibitionism as well before we go into why, because I feel like
we're on a bit of a roll here.
Yeah, they're like two sides of one coin, and like how you said about like sometimes like you have like fantasies about people like watching, which is a common thing. There is even oh my gosh, what's it called? There is a type of fantasy that a lot of men have where when they feel kind of inadequate and they fantasize about watching somebody else have sex with their wife.
Oh, yeah. What's that called?
I can't remember.
Oh my gosh, how annoying that we can't remember.
I know, I do know it. I had done like a research into it because sometimes people will go on like these like American sites where you can like hire like someone to come to your house and they turn up in like a leather jacket and like basically like make you watch and like then like clean up the mess like afterwards, and it turns on this man that because I think there's something about cuckolding, that's it. Yes, yeah, or cuckolding or something, yeah, because there's something that especially, I mean, all of these behaviors, they come from somewhere. So when people have felt like humiliated or inadequate, especially in their younger years, it's really common to sexualize these feelings of inadequacy or these kind of traumatic events. It gives it a pleasurable thing. But in the exhibitionism, quickly,
because I'm like, why do I want that?
So I mean, that's why
not do I love doing it in crazy places?
But it might be, I'm sure there will be something playing into it.
Yeah.
But with exhibitionism, traditionally, it's kind of like the other side of the coin of voyeurism.
Yeah.
Where there are the voyeurism, the people that like to peer through windows and watch, and then the exhibitionism where people like to expose themselves. And there is this sexual gratification that comes from it.
Yeah.
And there was another part of exhibitionism, which I found really interesting, where sometimes a male in particular likes to expose his girlfriend or expose images of her, which clearly I found interesting. I only read that like 2 days ago, and I was like, holy shit. So these paraphilic behaviors have got so many different like avenues within themselves.
Yeah, it's a spectrum.
Totally, because even so I think there's only 8 paraphilic disorders that are kind of logged in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of mental disorders, but there is like infinite different kinds of sexual expression, and some of them are quite odd or may cause the person distress, but these 8 are the most prevalent and clinically, and that's why they have their own kind of diagnostic criteria. But there are so many, like, people. I mean, I've even talked to you about like my own theories about through like sexual like masochism and stuff, where they're, you know, where like through the play, and like these people they report having like a better quality of life or a better quality in their relationship when they like enact this like play in their sexual lives where they're like dominating each other and tying each other up and kind of showing this side of aggression. So and then like I've done a lot of research into like the science of like childhood emotion and kind of where these attachment patterns come, and the like healthy forms of expression, and how through play it's a really healthy way to express, even when, like, you know, when you see parents like telling their kids off for like pretend shooting each other and things like that. From the research that I've done through the Neufeld Institute, there is a research he's done through like play with children, where when they're doing this, it's a healthy form of expression and of letting out their anger or whatever it is in a way there's no consequence. They're not actually damaging anyone, but they're still able to express it, so it's not actually displaced in another area where perhaps it actually does have a repercussion or a consequence. And that's kind of my theory around adult sexual play, because
I love that.
It's really interesting to me, so I would love to go into that more. But yeah, with the voyeurism, it's you enjoy watching, and in particular when the person doesn't know that you're watching.
Interesting.
And then the exhibitionism, which is often tied in with voyeurism, or is kind of the opposing side to it, is enjoying exposing yourself or exposing somebody else. So, and then of course it only becomes a disorder when you can't control it, or the behavior is compulsive, or just really intense, the thoughts. And like we had discussed too, even like the like porn and things, like, do people that partake in porn, are they exhibitionists? Do they like showing themselves? Does that turn them on to expose themselves in that way?
I would say that's probably how a lot of porn stars
like
get
into it.
Because
but then
they would.
You could also go into like the voyeurism of watching, but then it's different because the people know that you're watching.
Exactly. So there's like, what's the
and
I think that's.
There's also there's not the intensity behind it as well, like the compulsion. I mean, I know a lot of people have like sex addictions, and especially like I've even done research on like emerging online sexual behaviors, where a lot of these paraphilic tendencies, people are moving online because it's easier to kind of get around the law. There's a lot of
that's
like,
what I was about to say. Like, because porn, people know that the people in that video you're watching know that they're being videoed.
Exactly. So it's different.
And that's why someone that maybe has this disorder wouldn't use those images.
Yeah.
Because that person knows that they're being used.
It's not the same kind of...
Whereas, like, you can take someone else's images.
Exactly. Or you can watch someone else and they don't know that it's you watching.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, you had said, like, what causes this kind of, like, behavior, right?
Yeah, well, mainly, I was kind of freaking out that I had some sort of disorder, but
no, no, definitely not. Like, that's the thing. It's so normal. Like, I mean, I'm sure everyone has fantasies of some kind of sexual thing.
Oh, yeah. I've got some.
I've got a few.
Yeah, I have some. They're very normal, tame fantasies.
Well, that's the thing. I think fantasies in general, I mean, some people have, like, fantasies where they pretend that they're like a baby and they wear like diapers and
oh my
things.
Gosh, like on Broad City.
Oh my god, yeah.
I don't have many.
Exactly. Like but that's the thing. If it's being reenacted or not reenacted, but enacted in play of some kind, it's not harming anyone. That's not a disorder. That's fine. Like some people might
dress up as like with a furry thing.
Yeah,
like, that's another thing.
I know. Yeah. Like some people might think it's weird, but it's not actually abnormal.
Yeah, if also like who are we to judge?
Exactly. You know? If they're doing something where it's not harming anyone and they find it pleasurable, then that's totally fine and safe and okay. It only becomes an issue when it's causing distress or harm.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, with all paraphilias in general, like there are some of them have like biological factors. Like I know with pedophilia, they've kind of really put it down to like testosterone, but then. So all the treatments like come into really minimizing or like castrating them and minimizing the testosterone, which has its whole own other array of problems. Yeah. But with a lot of other paraphilias, there are usually more prominent like psychosocial factors. So often, I mean, it's not really, there's nothing definitive because there's such a lack of research in this area.
Yeah. What would one of those factors be?
So like the most kind of common themes that surround the etiology or origin of paraphilic behavior, like I know with voyeuristic disorder, the one that I had looked into, the common theme is like disordered childhood relationships.
Yeah.
So, or childhood trauma, whether it's sexual or emotional or physical. But it's just seems to be the most common theme.
Yeah.
I think too, like even having a poor attachments to your parents or having an absent father or a very aggressive father, there are correlations as well.
Yeah.
But it just creates this like this sense of loneliness if there has been a trauma, especially a sexual trauma. There is like a different view of the world. I mean, both you and I know that the way that you interact with people after the fact is so the level of trust is just diminished.
This is like the hardest thing to think about because, and this is why like I think people with these disorders, like we're just trying to normalize not having this disorder, but seeking help for it because like we know, like I absolutely know firsthand how traumatic it can be to like experience a sexual assault as an adult. What it did to me is I can't even imagine being a child and having to do that.
Yeah.
Like, that's really
it
awful.
Fucks up your whole life.
Yeah.
And that's the thing too, like
these people weren't born this way.
No, like I mean,
they were created.
Exactly. Like I mean,
they made some wrong decisions maybe.
There are arguments into like some of the biological factors through being like born a certain way. But yeah, oftentimes it's through these early childhood experiences. And I think that's what creates, for me, like when it comes to kind of studying these things, I genuinely find a lot of empathy for these people. And I understand that kind of in society, there is like this stigma of like, especially when you look at pedophiles and things, like how dare you do that to a child, which don't get me wrong, I'm not
totally
disregarding the child at all.
Yeah.
But it's sad too when you look at the person suffering it, especially because oftentimes they find their own behavioral thoughts so distressing.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to these other forms of paraphilias where it's just kind of these abnormal sexual interests that are so intense and persistent, it comes from such a broken place, like such a broken childhood and these disordered coping mechanisms and trying to make sense of the situation, oftentimes reenacting trauma.
Yeah.
And it's really sad. Like it really is really sad. So usually there is a common theme of disordered childhood relationships, childhood trauma in particular, sexual trauma, or intense like humiliation.
Yeah. That also, man, it just really hurts me to think of that.
Yeah, and then, well, that's the thing, because these are children at the time that and then they grow into this, you know?
Yeah.
And then there is also
probably because they have this like really dysfunctional family, they don't feel like they can go to anyone, so it just like literally ends up like festering and becoming this really ugly thing.
Exactly. I think, well, that's the thing too, because there is also this common theme of the disordered relationship with the parents.
Yeah.
I mean, not always, but definitely it's a factor that has been studied. And then there's so many, the childhood factors I think are just so significant. And I think it doesn't just translate to like paraphilias, it also translates to like all mental health.
Yeah.
Like I think this is kind of where my interest in studying like childhood emotion has come from, because I feel like people really struggle to understand even just depression and anxiety and where these what would be considered abnormal like feelings come from. And I feel like they're so hard to treat. Like, you know, you look at how much medication is prescribed these days, yet it hasn't at all reduced the prevalence of these mental health problems. And I just think would not surprise me at all if the link is just solely to these childhood relationships or traumatic events in somebody's life. And I think too, like, you don't have to have significant trauma in your childhood to have these issues. It can it can just be
what someone would consider significant. Like, it can be really insignificant too.
It's just the lack of understanding how to guide a child through their intense emotions, and they develop these really poor coping mechanisms for how to express that, especially if it's not socially acceptable. Then there's shame around it too. And coming back to the paraphilias, like, people that feel this way often don't seek help because they feel shameful about it or because of the social stigma, which also just adds to the problem. Like, how, if there is such a stigma in society about this kind of, I don't want to say behavior, because, you know, when it comes to hurting other people, the behavior's not okay. But the thoughts themselves, or the distress it's causing the person themselves to even feel that they are thinking or feeling these things, they feel so shameful about it that they don't seek help. And there is such a stigma out there that oftentimes there's not really much information on how to give these people help. And I mean, there is even stigma among clinicians in this area. So that's where the fear comes from of doing anything. Like, even in regard to them being studied, they're usually only really studied in a forensic setting because people don't come forward. So I think, I mean, that's half the reason that, like, we want to do this podcast anyway, is to really normalize talking about these things. And
just talking about how you're feeling in general.
I think if you feel any way, it's okay. If it's causing you distress or you're worried about harming someone else, I think it's so important to seek help. But you shouldn't feel shameful for the way you're thinking or feeling, because at the end of the day, if you can recognize it and you want to do something about it, that makes you a good person, not a bad person.
Totally. It's the people that recognize that it's causing harm and distress and are ignoring it.
That's the problem.
Like, keeping these things a secret because it's wrong. So they have to keep it a secret.
Exactly.
No, that's not okay.
So
interesting.
Manifesting throughout the life, these like behaviors. So if someone, say for example, has had some kind of trauma in childhood, especially if it's significant, like really intense humiliation or say sexual abuse or something like that, getting older, it's common to reenact the trauma. So some people will like partake in the same kind of behavior, trying to make sense of it, whether they do the same thing that maybe their attacker did, or they reenact it in other ways by kind of partaking in similar sexual situations. Usually people even dissociate through it too, so they won't even necessarily know why they feel drawn to this kind of thing, but they still feel this intense draw to it, and they keep partaking in it even though they might not even find it pleasurable. There is also there is like that sexual side, but also there is the sense of trying to make sense of it, or trying to find pleasure in such a painful situation, or gain control over if it's something that they felt that they kind of lost all control over and don't have any control, it's really common to then fantasize about gaining control of that situation, where maybe the roles are changed and they are the one that is basically doing what was done to them in one way, shape or form.
They're like sexualizing it so that it feels good.
Yeah, so oftentimes people will sexualize it so it feels good if they are still kind of playing that victim in the situation.
Okay, yeah.
Where they're just trying to make sense of it. So they might go and partake in the behavior, but they are still playing that same role where they were the one that was victimized.
Interesting, okay.
But sometimes there is this fantasy of changing the role to gain that control and that domination. And that's where sometimes you see these behaviors turn, like when there are certain serial killers that have been studied, that always comes down to that control, controlling and dominating their victim to change their own narrative, to gain control of their own narrative. That's where the aggression and those more dangerous ones come in.
Yeah, like I always use this serial killer as an example. Like, I can't remember what his name is, probably doesn't matter in the end, but when he was like 5 or 6 or 7, I don't know, young, he was walking around in his mum's high heels.
Oh yeah, you've told me about this guy.
And he was like severely told off for it and like humiliated over it by his mother because she was not a nice person. And then he ended up sexualizing females' shoes because of that experience. Like he knew in that instant, because he was like, I'm not allowed to do this, it's wrong.
Yeah.
So he had to sexualize it, and then he ended up killing a bunch of people and then cutting off their feet and like masturbating over their feet that he would keep in the freezer. Yeah. Like, do you know, like, this thing can be like actually like a really intense moment for that child.
Plants a seed. I think as well for him it would have just been associated with that intense humiliation, which is where
because she I think she even made him like go outside and like it was really bad.
Yeah. That's
like a dog.
There are so many. That's the thing too, like how I said there's often disorders that are comorbid.
Yeah.
So when you see specific people and you're kind of trying to make sense of them, it's never just one easy flow, like step by step.
Yeah.
There are always other aspects and usually other comorbid disorders which have their own symptoms and their own way that they kind of present themselves, and everything gets mixed up together, and it's never just one thing, and I think that's what makes it so complicated to understand.
Totally.
But yeah, I mean, that's the thing with psychology, like one small thing can happen, but if it's significant enough, it can change the course of that child's life or that person's life.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so they're through like people either reenacting their trauma, whether they're doing it to dominate and take control, or whether maybe they're still the victim and trying to make sense of the situation is common. But also when these kinds of behaviors like voyeurism, for example, becomes a disorder and these thoughts become really intense and repetitive and just like constant, really, oftentimes people feel distressed, but they still act on it in some way to try and rid the thoughts. So like with OCD, for example, with obsessive compulsive disorder, which is often linked with like voyeurism and other paraphilias.
Interesting.
People feel this intense compulsion, like they haven't completed something. So like I remember there was this movie where I think it was Jack Nicholson, and he had to like switch the light switch on and off like 10 times before he felt like satisfied that he had like switched it off or lock the door or whatever. Yeah. And it's because, I mean, like, I have this where I will lock, I know you're laughing at me because you always tell me I'm OCD. Yeah. But, like, I'll lock the doors and then I know I've locked them, but I just feel like I still need to check it, and I don't feel satisfied until I go around and check them again.
Yeah, and you also arrange your fruit and vegetables by colour and, like... And the bananas have to be facing the right way up.
No, it's just they bruise otherwise.
Okay, babe.
But it's to get rid of the intense like, thoughts, the intrusive thoughts.
I was about to say an intrusive thought.
Because they become intrusive and really distressing. And so it's like, well, if I just if I just go do it again and make sure it's done, then it just alleviates the intrusive thought and I feel better about it.
Yeah.
And that's where, but then obviously it becomes a problem when it starts interfering with your life, which is where the like obsessive compulsive disorder becomes a disorder as well.
Right.
But so, I mean, I'm sure so many people can relate to something where there is just like, they just can't stop thinking about it until they just do it and then it's done.
Yeah.
But so if you're thinking about this being like intrusive sexual thoughts, like wanting to observe people, for example.
Yeah.
Then these people like feel so intense about it that they have to act on it, or they might act on it in a way, say, like from their home or something if they're doing something online, or maybe they do go and peer through someone's window, whatever it is. But the point is to masturbate to try and reach orgasm to then alleviate that distress and make it go away. But the problem with this is it's just like a loophole, because every time you reach orgasm, it conditions the behavior.
Exactly. That's what I was actually like. You're basically just like telling yourself that this is a good thing because you're sexualizing it.
It reinforces the behavior. So people feel distressed and they either masturbate to try and make it go away, the intrusive thoughts go away, which then reinforces the behavior and it will escalate continues. Too, right? It escalates. It becomes more prevalent. The thoughts become more common.
Yeah.
Or sometimes they resist it altogether and just try to ignore it. But that's like when you go on a diet and you try not to eat something and then all of a sudden you binge on it because the intensity of missing out on it. So then there is that factor as well. There has been like some research. I remember there was a study, it was like in the 80s, of trying to kind of recondition yourself through orgasm. So there was a man who was feeling really distressed by his voyeuristic tendencies and behavior, and he had gone to a psychiatrist or a psychologist or something, and they had suggested that he uses an image of I'm not sure what it would have been of actually, because he was displaying voyeurism. So but it was an image. He wasn't standing outside someone's window. And basically, like, jack off to it. And then when he's about to reach orgasm, move his focus onto the thing he's trying to change or recondition his behavior into.
Interesting.
And he did it. And after, I think, about 6 months or something, it was reported that he was in basically remission of this behavior.
Wow.
But then I suppose the more common, or I wouldn't say more common, the more recent studies have shown treating the OCD, the obsessive compulsive disorder, with medication or pharmacological therapy, to try and kind of reduce the intensity of the intrusive thoughts.
Okay.
But there is still such a lack of research and therefore a lack of really truly understanding how to treat it.
Yeah.
And I think too, like, when something becomes part of someone's core sexual script, you can never change that. I know that and I remember reading this book about men who would partake, like have sex with men that thought that they were straight.
Oh my God.
And they were like married and things, and they would find like the behavior distressing and they couldn't understand why they were behaving in it, and they had gone to this psychiatrist who this was kind of like his specialty. And the book is super interesting. And he basically, majority of these people had childhood sexual trauma, and they were reenacting their trauma. And oftentimes they didn't even know why they were reenacting their trauma. Like they kind of felt this like intense need to have sex with a man or partake with a man in some way, but didn't know why. Like they weren't even finding it pleasurable. Oftentimes they would go and do it and feel quite disgusted with themselves afterward, but then find themselves back there again like a week later. And oftentimes too, some of them were dissociating or depersonalizing and weren't even grouping it together with the fact that they had a wife and children at home, or I know. And so they were seeing this guy and he was realizing that they were reenacting their trauma. And they obviously, like, they had identified as straight, and some of them were curious, like asking him if does he think that they're gay, or are they just not accepting their sexuality? And I mean, there were some instances with these people that had come to them where he had realized, they were bisexual or they were gay, But oftentimes too, like, which is commonly known, usually the ones that were gay were not open to the fact of them being gay. They were really homophobic or resistant of being gay, which is, I mean, I know that that's just like common knowledge. Usually men that are super homophobic, there's some kind of lack of integration there. Whether it's just maybe they're not gay completely, but even if there's some kind of curiosity there and they don't want to admit it to themselves.
True.
But basically majority of these people that he was reporting about were straight. And often they were saying, you know, if I'm gay, just help me find that I'm gay and let me be happy in my life. Like, they felt so conflicted within themselves, not understanding why they felt this intense compulsion to engage in this kind of behavior, but they weren't even finding it pleasurable, but they couldn't help the intensity of keeping going back and keeping on partaking in it. But then oftentimes they had a wife, or they had a girlfriend, or I remember reading about this one guy who had just got engaged, and it wasn't until he got engaged that he thought, holy fuck, what about this dude? That he hadn't even pieced together that it was like he was cheating the whole time.
Oh my god.
I know, because it's such a separate part of themselves. I remember this doctor saying that you could really tell that it was like trauma reenactment when this part of them was like a whole, it just didn't fit in with the rest of who they were as a person. Like, it was a completely separate entity of themselves. It was not integrated at all. And basically, so what they were saying is, like, you know, these men were wanting help, whether it was admitting to themselves their sexuality or moving through what the problem was. And oftentimes when they were able to see that they were reenacting their trauma, where it was coming from, it kind of reduced the intensity of the intrusive thoughts or the behavior, but it never could make it fully go away, because now it's a part of their core sexual script. They've reached orgasm over it so many times. There is this sexual attraction there now in some way, shape or form, yet these men were still identifying as straight. There was nothing about it where they wanted to wake up in the morning next to fucking stubble or spend their life or have children with. That's not what it was, but they could not help now having this some kind of sexual script or sexual, I don't even want to say attraction, but just urge.
Urge.
Because of this intensity to reenact the trauma.
Wow.
And I think too, like, stepping out of like the sexual realm for a minute, and like how you and I mean, we've gone through a process of kind of understanding, or to some extent, our behavior and our own relationship dynamics, and reenacting trauma of our own and things like that.
Why we do what we do.
And becoming aware, allowing us to it not to have so much control over us.
Yes. It honestly, like, it's such a game changer.
Exactly. But it doesn't change the triggers or the intensity or the emotion that's there.
But it helps you to deal with it.
But it helps you to recognize, oh, I know where that's coming from, and I actually don't want to partake in that because I know it's not going to make me feel good.
Right.
So it's the same thing. But I think because it's sexual, there is such a stigma around it. And I think too, like, we've also talked about, you know, I mean, when women identify as bisexual, it's like, oh no, they're just straight and they want to have fun. And when a man identifies as bisexual, it's, oh, he's just denying that he's gay.
Which is something that makes me really mad.
I know.
And like, why? Why?
Exactly.
Like, why can't, like, it's such a spectrum. Like, and so fluid. So
exactly. And then you look at these traumatic reenactments that involve sexual activity, which is not just these ones with like sexual abuse. There are also women that have been sexually assaulted that reenact their behavior sexually. There are also women, I'm sure also men, although I haven't done much research into it, that have not sexual trauma but other kinds of trauma, and they still reenact it sexually. But it's really common to express or sexualize these really deep painful parts because it creates a pleasurable response out of it.
Well, like, this just makes me think of like me being more self-aware and being in relationships that were really chaotic. It's like I was driven to them. Like, it's like you need the ups and downs. And like, I mean, we've said this cortisol before, but like, it's like the chaos is like what drives you in the relationship, and then the sex
it feels
is
like chemistry.
Like, exactly, but it's not.
No.
Like, at all.
Exactly.
And I just think that that's a really interesting relationship dynamic.
But it's all related. And that's the thing. And like how you said about And then there is that intensity in the sexual experience with these partners. Yeah. That's why. It's
exactly. Yeah. Like you're reconditioning yourself to just keep being with this person that you actually shouldn't be with. Yeah. Like, and like I've like always struggled with with that until recently.
Now, it's like where that whole term like makeup sex comes from.
Exactly.
Where it's
Which is so ridiculous.
They have these, or like the partner will, or maybe both of them will instigate these intense fights, and then they have this intense sex afterwards, which makes it feel so much better.
Yeah, because it's like these really intense emotions, but they're actually just triggers from your like trauma that you're acting out.
Yeah.
Like,
and so, and then it's really common to play that out through the sexual experience to make it pleasurable in some way. And then you see like going back to voyeurism, whether it's disordered childhood relationships, sexual relationships, whatever it is, these people find this sense of control over observing it, and they sexualize the experience, whether they're sexualizing feeling humiliated or inadequate, or having a lack of closeness with their parents, and therefore they don't have the understanding or the connection to court. Like there was even like theories in just disordered courting. These people don't know how to have interpersonal relationships. They want to partake in this relationship with this woman, because 9 times out of 10 voyeurism is in men. They want to have this relationship with this woman, but they don't know how to go about it. So instead they observe, they stalk, they watch her through her window and play it out in their head that way. Yeah. And sometimes too, there is a fear there where they feel like there's some kind of rejection, or they won't be good enough. So, or there is the fear to actually partake in it in real life. So they just observe it anyway. There's this barrier between it because of the fear to partake, whether they're watching a man or a woman, or reenacting trauma, or reenacting or like self-medicating the humiliation, or whatever it is, self-medicating the disordered relationships, the lack of connection, the loneliness. There are so many different aspects that it can be looked at, but they all come from some kind of disordered relationship or some kind of traumatic experience. Yeah.
Which is like, that's all of us, just on a way less intense scale.
Exactly. And that's the thing, like you have to understand too, because this kind of behavior usually starts to surface in teenage years. Yeah. But you can't diagnose it that young. Yeah. But as it starts surfacing in teenage years, and I think everyone knows too, in their teenage years, like everyone partakes in kind of different or weird behavior through these years that maybe they wouldn't do now, or they would think about now and understand the consequence of it. But through these years, I mean, if you lack these interpersonal relationships, and you're developing these poor coping mechanisms, or these poor ways of trying to make sense of your pain, or take pleasure out of your pain, or take control of your pain, or whatever it is, and it's working for you, and you keep doing it, and it keeps conditioning itself, and it keeps reinforcing itself, by the time that you're an adult, that behavior is like set now. Like it's so much harder to correct. And so I mean, everyone has triggers, most people have perhaps learned coping mechanisms for their emotions. But you see just like one wrong turn or one step taken, and if that route's taken, it can turn into these behaviors, and then these people can become so distressed and they can't get on top of it. And it just takes over their whole life.
I can't even imagine. Like, imagine if my like sexual fantasies, like doing it in random places, like was like just such an urge that I like had to make G Daddy like come with me outside, like we couldn't even do it in the bed anymore. Like,
and imagine if it was distressing you at the same time. Imagine if you were aware enough to know that it was not okay and it wasn't normal and it was causing you so much distress, but you could not help the intensity of the feeling that you kept doing it.
Yeah, I can't, like, that would be so upsetting.
Exactly.
And then imagine if I didn't have anyone that I felt like I could speak to about it.
Exactly.
Like, that's even worse.
And then you ruminate it in your own head, and then it just gets worse and worse and continues and continues.
Yeah, but thankfully I have you and a whole podcast for people to listen to.
To listen to my problems.
To listen to my weird things.
But that's exactly right. Like, and that's why I have, I suppose, this like sympathy and empathy, because I feel like it actually is really sad.
It is. It's genuinely sad. Like, I mean, it's sad as long as the person doesn't actually end up harm anyone.
Yeah,
and they
I think
make the right choices in getting help.
When you're, I mean, like, if you're aware, which 9 times out of 10, if you're behaving this way, most people know it's not okay.
Yeah.
That's where it's like, okay, well, just, you need to take the step to seek help. You need to not feel so shameful about your behavior, because at the end of the day,
and
what's
seek
more
help from the
important?
right people.
Yeah, I think that's important too, because I think too, because of the stigma and perhaps the lack of research, finding the wrong person can then also make the situation worse. If someone feels really fearful to seek help, and they seek help and then they're kind of met with this response that's not supportive or helpful in any way, they're not going to keep seeking help. If it's already so difficult to take that step and do that, then so I think you really need to do the research on who to seek help from. Yeah,
definitely.
But this is also why I have such an interest in this area, because I feel like just like sex psychology in general, especially in New Zealand, it's not very prevalent, I would say. It's like I know that there's like one body in New Zealand that for like sexual therapists, but there's no like university like papers on it or anything. You have to like, it would be like a thesis research where you would go and do the research yourself.
That would be so interesting. I really I definitely think that there's a lack of that understanding here.
And just like such an interesting area. There was something else I was going to go into with voyeuristic disorder, because we've gone on so many tangents and rants that's actually like, we've just talked about kind of like paraphilias in general, but and like reenacting trauma in general when I was going into like the etiology of it. But like I had talked about like the disordered childhood relationships and the, peering through people's windows and watching them and reaching orgasm and it conditioning the behavior or reinforcing it. The distress, obviously, as well, that it often causes the other person. I covered the treatment. Maybe I did talk about everything I wanted to talk about in regard to it. I felt like there was something I thought of before and then I was like, forgot again.
It happens all the time.
Just popped in and it's popped straight out.
Honestly, happens to me constantly.
I know.
Sometimes I start talking and then before I've finished talking, I've forgotten what I was talking about.
Yeah. Me too. Like, start at the sentence, got to the end of the sentence or the middle of the sentence and I forgot what the beginning was.
Same.
Now I don't know how to finish it off.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh, cool, great. I want, like, I'm so curious. Now I'm definitely going to, after this, go and think about why I do the things that I do or have the thoughts that I have about like someone, because I'm like,
but you can't change what it is that
but I'm just curious,
turns you on.
Like,
that's
I'm just
the thing.
And I also don't care.
It probably comes from somewhere. Yeah,
like I'm very happy with my sex life, so like I'm like, it's very normal, everyone, but like I'm still like, I'm just curious, just so that I can like understand, think about it, and even I think it's just healthy to like, it's like the I think the only paraphilia that is more common in women than men is the sexual masochism, where they like to be, because the woman likes to be dominated or tied up or humiliated or inflicted pain, sure. But I think it's funny because, I mean, if you look historically, women are always, minimized by men, and like, I mean, obviously it's getting better, but they didn't have control, and yet they've sexualized this. This is the only common, or the only paraphilia that is more common in women is one where they are made to feel humiliated by a man or made inferior by a man. Well, but like I also like, because I consider myself a feminist, like I also completely understand that, like of course we're gonna have to sexualize it. Like, what else do we have? Like, but also I think... But it creates the pleasure response for something that might have been distressing or painful otherwise. Because it is, but society has just made us kind of forget that. Yeah. Like, it is distressing and painful always being undermined by men. Yeah. It is. Yeah. But especially in like my role at work, I feel like I'm always really like kind of giving direction and having to like step up and like really fight for my place. Yeah. But then in the bedroom, I'm the opposite. I'm like, do me, like, take control of me for once. Yeah. Like, And that's why. But otherwise, I don't think I would like it. Yeah, that's interesting to think about. It is. Because I think, I'm sure some people want to
have a release in the bedroom that's perhaps the opposite of their life experience.
Exactly.
And then some also pleasurize their painful life experiences through their sexual experiences and have this intense attraction to it that way. And some people like to kind of play around in general with all these different things, which I think is more common for you and I.
Yeah,
like,
I was going to be like, I mean, that's me too.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, I don't think there's like a one size fits all, but there is definitely these kind of just sexual scripts that become more ingrained due to these intense emotional experiences in life, especially negative experiences.
Yeah.
Whether it's because of the intensity and it's just kind of finding making sense of it or taking control, or whether it's pleasurizing the experience or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But it's really common that it's reenacted some way in a sexual way. And I mean, people reenact it in other ways too. It's why you see these really aggressive fucking people that just lose their shit and, whatever.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
But it's not uncommon for it to be reenacted sexually. And I think that's why we like talking about sexual stuff, because no one does. And so people don't understand, and they see these really odd behaviors and they're like, have so much to say about it or so much judgment around it. But actually, it just like any significant disordered behavior or abnormal behavior, there is a reason for it.
Yeah.
It comes from somewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think, that's like our key point of doing the podcast.
Yeah.
Right? Like hoping that people just understand better and are like more open to talk about it.
Or take the time to sit back and not necessarily make an immediate judgment.
Yeah, and I think it all ties in, like especially sexual things. They all like it ties into your relationships, and that's super interesting.
Yes,
and
because like how we were talking about last week, if you've got a boyfriend that wants to be pegged or wants to give it a crack, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And not feeling immediately judgmental about that.
Exactly. Like having the capacity to actually think about it and be like, hey, that's normal to have these like sexual thoughts, and that's fine. Do you want to hear the craziest place that I've had sex?
Of course. Oh my god, I realized, you were like, you literally like touched on this I think yesterday, and then you were like, no, I'm gonna save it for the podcast. And I'm like, I completely forgot.
But then I was thinking about it this morning in the shower, and I like don't want to say it in case the place is like tries to sue me or something.
Nah,
that won't happen.
Nah, they can't prove it.
True. Well,
this is not an admission of guilt.
This is not like hypothetically.
If I were hypothetically gonna have had sex in this hypothetical place, okay, tell me where it was.
In the Skyline Gondola in Queenstown.
Oh no, you did. You've told me that, because I was like, did you use a condom? You said no, and I'm like, how did you walk out and leave?
Well, because it was like on our way home, so we were all going back down the mountain,
clenching your legs
genuinely. I was.
As you're waddling.
I was.
I can't do that.
I was wearing pants, and I had to pull my pants down a little bit.
Well, obviously.
Yeah, but sometimes I'll go somewhere and like I'll wear a dress, and anyway. But.
Right. I could never. Like I just couldn't. I couldn't retain that inside of me in a public place.
Yeah, it was honestly like. Got in the car, got back, and I like immediately had a shower. And
but you know me, I'm like, I need to shower.
I was pretty proud of that, but I'm also like,
you said you've had sex in public heaps of times, eh?
So much.
I reckon it would be honestly so common. I've had sex in public.
Oh yeah, I've done it up the top of the mount. Like
I've done it at the mount.
Done. I did it at Universal Studios, not on a ride or anything. But
Wait, what? I just realized what Universal Studios was.
A theme park.
Yeah. Oh my god, Lauren, there's so many children around.
Okay, well we didn't do it in front of the children, Tarryn.
I am appalled.
It was a private. It was a handicap bathroom.
Oh yeah, I've done it in a handicap bathroom.
Oh, you got to.
It's just right at Passage.
Yeah. Speaking of orgasms.
Oh yeah.
Next week.
Yeah.
We talk female
orgasms,
baby.
Because we've had some people tell us, and then also I just know of other people, women that have not orgasmed or were like in their like late or mid 20s before they ever had one.
I nearly collapsed when I heard that.
Had children before they had I think I had my first orgasm when I was like 8.
It's genuinely same. And we were talking about this the other day. Do we want to share it already?
I was literally like going up do you remember those like metal bars that like you had to like, pull yourself up?
Oh yeah, totally.
At primary school, and oh my god,
and it
happened, and I was like, what just happened? I thought I like pissed myself.
Yeah.
But it was so great.
I'm trying to think about the first time that it happened. I can't. Anyway, but we'll save it for the save it for the next episode.
Yeah.
So get ready. And like, if you're a man listening, hey, we can give you some pointers too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because I've got some great
tips.
Some great childhood stories. Because after that, I kept making sure it happened.
Me too, because mine happened on accident the first time too.
Yeah.
And then I just was like a fiend for it.
Yeah. It's like a drug addiction.
Yeah.
An orgasm addiction for children.
It's so bad that we were so young. I genuinely would have probably been like 8.
It's not bad.
No. Okay. See, I'm doing it. I'm doing it.
Yeah.
I'm perpetuating this stigma that it's a bad thing. It's
around
not.
like 8 or 9. It's
rape culture.
It's really common for children to get curious about like their body, and they can have these kind of orgasms and feelings at a really young age. Usually girls over boys, I think.
Yeah.
But still, I think it's important to talk about because so many people have children, and if they saw their kids doing something like that, oftentimes they would tell them off, and it's like, hey, they're just exploring their body. They don't know any different. Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Look at me and my journey that I'm on.
I feel like next week will be a funny one. Today's like we're talking about like these intense, like serious things, but hopefully that gave some
insight,
some clarity
into some people's behaviours. We think we're so funny. Eh?
Don't sue us. Okay, bye.
Okay, keep it real. Wait, what do I always say? Peace out.